For me, it's a special moment to be here. That's why it was a special moment to be here. Am I supposed to hold? No, I'm just going to put it here. All right. I'm sure we all know we're at KM World and not at some other conference. It's special because around 15 years ago, I attended a KM conference, and there was a person, a Shell KM practitioner speaker, and that presentation meant a lot for me. I've used that presentation quite a few times in the board meetings I had, the CIO budget calls, etc., trying to convince them to make an investment in their budget for KM. And if they were reluctant, my last trick up my sleeve was always, well, this is how Shell is doing it because of that presentation. So for me, it's special now to be here representing Shell for you, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. What I'm going to talk about is about Shell and Shell KM and how we're doing the tacit knowledge part of KM. So we're calling that the tacit knowledge value chain, and there's more to it in a moment. But before I start, let's do a quick exercise in speed reading, because I am part of Shell, and I'm going to talk about KM value and about KM in the future, and that means I have an obligatory cautionary note I have to share with you all. All right, I'm sure we've all read it by now, so let's get going. So again, my name is Daan Hannessen. I am the head of KM for Shell. These are my 3 kids. They're a little bit older right now. I have quite an extensive background in KM for 24 years and a number of organizations across Europe, Australia, and the US. My previous role was here in DC at the IMF, if you're familiar with that. And yeah, back in the day, I did AI when no one knew what it was, and we were still trying to invent a Wikipedia. So AI has come a long way since. So today's purpose is to share with you, and hopefully you pick something up around what we do around tacit knowledge. Shell KM is doing a lot more, and I'm trying to explain to you a little bit what involves and what the enablers are. Talk a bit about the value, and I have to be cautious there again because I'm not allowed to share you real tangible numbers, but I'll do my best to paint a picture of what it means for us. So again, the purpose is here for you to hopefully learn and pick a bit more, and at the end there will be Q&A. I'll start with a more broader context to sort of paint the picture where Shell is and the environment we're working in. And yeah, when I picked the Shell, picked this slide, I was pretty sure this is a title that is very much familiar to most of you in this room. The world is changing, and the environment that Shell is currently operating in is absolutely changing drastically and really significantly as well. Of course, we're talking about climate change, energy crisis, mainly in Europe, but across the world as well, conflicts, all things that Shell is it's touching Shell in its core as well. And Shell is very committed to help transform ourselves for a better future as well. So for us, the world is changing. Last week, I spoke to one of the industries in Shell. Shell is so wide and so big. We have multiple industries in our group. We have a chemicals community, upstream, downstream. There's gas, there's trading. I've even been told that Shell sells the most coffee around the world, just to give you an example. In all their petrol stations, we have 46,000 petrol stations across the world. So it's huge, and there's multiple industries, and they all have to change because of this big transformation we're going through. And when I spoke to this chemicals VP, he tells me, Dan, it's not just one transformation. We have transformations stacked upon a transformation upon another transformation. And at the same time, of course, we're trying to deliver our products as well to all our customers, individuals and other industries as well. And I'm painting this picture because that's the world that KM has to operate in as well. Shell therefore has come up with its own transformational strategy. It's called Powering Progress. You may have heard of this. And it's all trying to deal with all these transformations. We're really moving from a traditional 120-year-old oil and gas organization into a net zero emissions energy company, which is, as you can probably tell, massive. We have our pillars there for our for powering progress, powering lives, respecting nature, generating shareholder value, because we are a publicly owned company, so we do have to respect our shareholders, and by achieving net zero emissions. Shell is committed to achieve net zero emissions by 100% by 2050 and 50% by 2030. So again, quite a big change. Another one, if you're interested, we've been digging wells, getting oil and gas out of the ground for 120 years, like I said, and it's that's going to stop by 2025. We're not digging any new wells anymore. Again, a major shift in our culture even. So again, that is sort of the overarching context that KM has to operate in. And we're not doing that alone. KM sitting in Shell together with a number related expertise areas. You have OD, organizational development, CI, continuous improvement. We have learning, we have causal learning, we have data insights, data analytics, and leadership development. So all together, we're trying to help our colleagues in Shell to learn and adapt much faster. So that's sort of the broader context. Now let's dive into KM a little bit more before I start talking about the tacit knowledge part, the tacit knowledge capture part. The KM program started in 2008. Before that, there was a lot of different KM initiatives happening around, but then we started to organize it. And back then we started to come up with 9 different solutions for knowledge management in KM. They were not built all at once, but they gradually were developed over those over the years since 2008. And the goal was also to say, all right, let's aim for the part that goes horizontal through Shell. And those were the technical functions. The technical functions, they serve upstream, downstream, gas, chemicals, by helping with their projects, their asset management, for instance, and their R&D, trading as well. So the focus back then, when the program started, let's focus on the technical functions and the technical critical knowledge aspects. So these 9 solutions were sort of supposed to help with all their needs across sort of the wide range of KM, the explicit part versus the tacit part. So just to, as an example, we have our dashboards, we have our experts listings, sort of as supporting functions. Expert listings are quite undervalued, I think, and very important if you start a program. This is the part where we go to the business and say, assign your experts in your field, and we maintain that. We will use those experts to validate content, to approve changes in your standards and your guidelines. And of course, they will be easier to find because we make them findable. We have an expertise finder, for instance. But yeah, a very important sort of supporting function as well. Then we have the more front-facing functions like an enterprise encyclopedia, the single point of access, which are sort of small portals dedicated to specific parts in the business. Again, Shell, if you include their contracts, is 500,000 people, many industries. So just not just one single point of access will do. We have accommodate many, many more. So this has this wide range, including our communities and our learning from experience, which I will address in a moment, of serving the business with your explicit needs, your tacit needs, etc. So how does this work? We have these 9. We do not just implement these 9 solutions from day one. We, and that's the KM team, the KM advisors specifically, they will go to the business with these under their arm basically and start assessing the maturity, the culture, what type of needs, immediate needs, the quick wins obviously, and sort of start to pick and choose what would work for this particular group first, this year, next year, and come up with a roadmap for implementing that and enhancing that further and further. So yes, you do see parts in Shell where they say, well, we just help us find our experts and build a nice knowledge repository. We can do that, obviously. There are others who say, do not bring me another database. We are sick and tired of your of whatever database you have in store for us. or we buy our own, that happens as well, as Joe, help us set up with our needs around collaboration, around community building, etc. So then we move more into the Shell Global Communities part and help serve them with their collaboration needs as well. Let's zoom in for 2022, just to give you a better idea of what that looks like for this year. I was allowed to share these numbers with you, but not everything, but I'll do my best. And these numbers are great, let me be honest, but they're absolutely not telling the entire story, right? So overall, for just this year, we have close to 160,000 unique users. So that includes the contractors, because they are able to access the KM solutions as well. We're over 50 regions with our KM products. What else could be interesting? The experts, again, top right. Again, I keep on coming back to that because I think it's a very missed opportunity in a lot of KM programs. We have now close to 3,500 experts listed there in the business. And again, these are assigned by the business. So these are principal technical heads, global discipline heads, all kinds of SMEs in the business. And they are extremely valuable, I can tell you. There's not much technology going on with that, as you can imagine. It's just a list, but to maintain it and have that governance in place is critical for the success of the rest of your KM program. We're doing well on the communities. Shell has a long history around setting up communities of practice way before the KM program even started. This is how I remember Shell. And that's still going really well. It's a fantastic environment to run your communities of practice. And again, this is where the experts can help, because they usually get assigned to be moderator in a particular community as well. And we validate documents as well. We have a whole content validation workflow as well. Again, the experts are the ones validating these documents. So very useful. But the big red square in the middle is the one I'm going to focus on. That's the tacit knowledge part, because that is absolutely the most successful and the most value-driving aspect of our entire KM's suite and ecosystem. Just this year, the value it brings is in the millions, in the many, many millions. So it's worth looking into it. There's a few numbers there. We have over 55,000 views so far, so it's quite used. But let's dive in a bit more, because we call that the integrated tacit knowledge value chain, because it has a number of key elements that sort of drives the value across. And it's absolutely far more than just one solution. I will talk about the tool that is using it, but a little bit more. But I need to explain to you first the whole value chain, what's involved, because this has a history of many years in the making. So the value chain looks a bit like this. I'm trying to share sort of the increase in value here of this value chain. It all starts on the left, and it starts with identifying and assessing your critical knowledge. This is where the KM team is very lucky. We have a group of facilitators, old Shell retirees, still with their network and their knowledge, obviously, of having moved around Shell across the world. We hire them, we train them to do specific interviews within the business where we think it's needed. It could be for a person leaving, but it could also for a major transition. We have huge amount of major refineries, and they're all in transition mode. They're all trying to change to a energy type of energy and chemicals type of refinery. So those transitions are for us triggers to send in these people and start to assess what critical knowledge needs to be captured and in what way. Who should we interview? What type of methodology do we use to do that? That all starts in that left part, assessing what type of knowledge we need to get out of that. Once we've done that, and we have recordings, transcripts, written down lessons learned from that, it moves to the next one, where we talk about the capture, retaining, and the retention and the validating of that content. If you have a lot of content, and it comes from all parts of Shell, you need a way to standardize that, to normalize that together, because otherwise you cannot bring content together. So again, there's another team involved sort of the back office team that we use in KM, who's doing that, who basically filters through all the lessons learned being submitted, either through those trained professionals or sometimes by people in the business themselves, and they normalize it, standardize that, and they reach out back to the business. What did you actually mean? Can you clarify this? Was it something similar to this? Again, very important. And once you have that all stored and it's accessible already, I think then the most important part start. I mean, again, it's this nice shiny database, which a lot of people in the business in Shell do not care about. It's all about how do you bring that knowledge back into the processes and in the way of working for Shell. So you actually start closing the learning loop, right? You want to learn something from this. So again, it's already searchable, findable, and you can subscribe to all of that as well. But the real key is to bring that knowledge in a smart way back and actually update processes, quality systems. Have those moderators in those community practice share those new lessons learned. Guys, this happened, or that happened. We need to learn from it. Something good happened, something bad happened, both ways. I'll explain a little bit more about the different types of lessons learned we're capturing in a moment. And of course, it's all has to do, of course, to try to support decision making in the business, have the knowledge right there when they need it, and with their insights. And last but definitely not least, because we're a very technical company, we have a lot of standards and guidelines, mandatory procedures to make sure that those gets updated with either an incident that has happened or a best practice as well. So this is sort of the value chain that we use and operate in. I'm trying to explain to you that how much is already involved, and I'm trying to explain a little bit more with this picture here. So you have people, technologies, processes involved to this. It's absolutely not just technology. Technology is only a small, tiny part there. And I've tried to list all the people involved, for example, and these are, of course, the people in the business, our business stakeholders, people that we train as well in the business that do sort of a part-time job in being a KM leader, but also senior management as well. You need them for everything as well. We have these facilitators that I mentioned earlier, and then we have a lot of people in the KM team, the advisors, the process owner, product owners, the back office teams, etc., etc. So from a technology, the main platform is LFE, Learning from Experience platform. That houses all those best practices I mentioned earlier, but that cannot function at all if we do not use our expertise finder, EF, the expertise finder master list, the global library, the communities, etc., etc. So it's absolutely an integrated whole. And then, of course, the processes, which also contains all the ways to capture the different best practices. And I've listed a number of those. The main one is ROC, Retention of Critical Knowledge Process. It's a Shell process that we use for our facilitators. Causals, we capture those in LFE. Lessons learned. LFI, learnings from incidents. Again, Shell operates in a very complex and sometimes dangerous environment. Things do go wrong every now and then. Of course, we have a whole process to learn from them. So those are the incidents where we send out a team and learn and capture everything that went wrong. And of course, the improvements needed to make sure it doesn't happen again. After action reviews, job transition guidelines, we also train the business to do a lot of self-facilitation. We have some really great but very stubborn folks in Shell, and they love to do it themselves. And that's why we say we've done with the method like, oh, no, you shouldn't do this. We're now in a more sort of collaborative spirit, like, hey, we're here to help. Can we help you? Can we capture what you've gotten out of it? Can we train you secretly behind the scenes? We're trying to really work together with them. So all the key enablers for the Shell tested knowledge chain. So diving a little bit further into that LFE platform, Learning from Experience, it's a platform that enables Shell to capture the benefits and the business value by sharing for the individuals the lessons learned that go in there, the practices worth replicating, and of course meant to share this across Shell, not just within their community. This platform has all the bells and whistles that you probably can think of. It has subscription services, filters, personalization, so we personalize per industry in Shell. They get their own skin, and it looks really like it's only their database. And also another point, we have playlists as well. So we combine these thousands of lessons learned, and that's what this back office team is doing. We combine them together in sort of broader themes and topics, and they get shared as well across. And they are very, very valuable, especially if you're new or you have a major project. You know, our projects take 5 to 10 years and cost billions and billions of dollars. If there's a major transition from one phase to another, this is where these playlists help a lot, because you get up to speed quite quickly. That's usually a new team involved. So this is getting them going really, really quickly. So that's LFE. An example of a lesson learned, and this is a very stripped down example. There's a lot more detail involved, but this is what I'm allowed to share. This is a quite straightforward example. As you know, Shell has a lot of storage where we store our products, oil, gas, chemicals, etc. They need to be cleaned. These tanks used to be a very manual and labor-intensive and even dangerous process. People came up with a way to use robots to do the internal cleaning, and they saved $10 million just in 2 refineries. What they do, they submit that in LFE, the right experts approve that, and they spread the word around amongst their communities. So the 10 million is just the savings just in this year for those 2 refineries. So you can understand, if you multiply that by the amount of refineries Shell has, that is quite significant. It's a very straightforward example. I thought this would hopefully help you a little bit. Some other examples, very, very summarized, of course, but the point here is, when I started working for more technical organizations, my initial naive thinking was always, this is all about technical problems we need to solve. And this is where KM comes in. What I've learned over the many, many years I've been doing this, the major issues are always around communication, on how we're dealing with our partners, how we set up our contracts, etc. So I've listed a number of learning categories here that sort of are related to those topics. The majority of our lessons learned are around cost avoidance, contracting, what type of partnership we're dealing with, how do we inform our partners. Shell works with thousands of different partners on those major projects. It's all about that mainly if you look in our database. Yes, we do have, you know, the bottom one, process improvement type of lessons learned, and the robot tank cleaning I showed earlier. They're absolutely there, but that's sort of 20% of the majority of our lessons learned. And yes, and it goes global and it goes across a number of customer groups. So LFE, that's the main tool I'm going to dive into. And before I really dive into the value and how we calculate it, let's look at more specifically on around LFE. It has this year over 5,000 unique users, which is quite nice for a sort of a niche solution in Shell. It has over 24,000 views just this year. So that is really good. A lot of these people return, is what it's telling us. And interesting, the bottom left and the bottom right, we have over 3,000 submissions this year, lessons learned, and only 1/6 has so far gets approved by our experts. So yes, we will have lessons learned in the database that are sort of unapproved yet, and it's clearly visible, and you can filter by no, I want only approved lessons learned, and those are the ones that are done by experts. The experts are very, very busy, so it's always pushing them, trying to get things approved. But we made the deliberate choice to already make available the ones that aren't approved yet. So the value that this is driving, and I'm going to talk a little bit more around that. And we use 2 approaches. And again, I'm not allowed to share the real dollar values there. And I'd sort of like to get the first one, the green one, out of the way first, because that's the very straightforward one that we use across all the KM solution that we have. It's making an assumption to calculate the value. It's making an assumption on how much time is being saved by the user. Someone comes into our solution, spends so many minutes there. Hopefully he or she finds something of value. Let's use a very conservative number. Let's say some person has saved 5 minutes in their work around this. That's sort of the assumption. Sometimes for some solution we use 10 minutes. We multiply that by a very low average hourly rate, and then we apply a number sort of constraining factor there, which is the effectiveness. Even though we only assume 5 minutes, we still apply sort of very conservative effectiveness percentage, 25% and sometimes 50% if we're feeling more realistic or optimistic. And out comes a certain number per user, and that's sort of used across all our KM solution. I think for this particular presentation, the top one is more interesting, and that is sort of applies to the LFE, the learning from experience solution, the tacit knowledge part, because that's where we use a free tier approach. We talk first about what someone submits, the and that's in terms of value, and that person, that submitter, is the one deciding on that value. Robotic tank cleaning could be a good example. We saved so much, $10 million. Fantastic. And usually people are very optimistic because they're really proud of what they found out, right? So we need to be careful there. But then it gets sent to an appropriate expert, and usually that person says, well, hang on, right? An example is, we have 46,000 petrol stations. These nozzles do freeze up in very cold regions, sometimes during winter. Someone, and this is a real life example, someone found a way to prevent that from happening during winter. That saves a lot because you can keep on using getting your gas there, use the nozzle there, etc. But that person was very optimistic because that person multiplied that local solution to with 46,000. And of course, an expert says, well, hang on, we only have so many assets in cold environments. We have others in the desert or in warmer climates, so it's a much lower value. So that's more realistic, and we call it the expert validated value. Still a lot. This is still in the tens of millions of dollars. But I think the real holy grail sits in that last part, because what you really are looking for is obviously to have that value that the expert is has assigned. You want that really being reused and reused and reused and replicated again and again. And that's where what we call the replicated value. And again, that's a much lower number. Robotic tank cleaning could be replicated somewhere else, smaller asset. We saved, instead of 10 million, 2 million of there. So that's the real KM holy grail that we're after. But you see the sort of decline in value along the way there. Another aspect which is quite critical for us is, and again, I couldn't add the numbers here, the real value, so I used the percentages here, is when we use, let's say, year 2018 as a baseline, that's where we used, that's 100% of the value LFE is driving. We see a huge amount of fluctuation. 2022 drove value in the hundreds of millions of dollars just for that, just using that particular value. And then, of course, as you can tell, a huge decline after that. And we were struggling for quite a bit. What is going on, and what is going on? And we found out it's sponsorship. We had a fantastic SVP, Senior Vice President, pushing 10,000 of his community to use LFE. That person leaves, gets promoted, or whatever happens, and boom, you lost hundreds of millions of dollars in value. And we haven't figured this out, how to deal with this. We haven't gotten into a more sustainable growth line here. For us, that is the major challenge here, the moving of people, transferring, could be within Shell, and you sort of have to start over again, gain their trust, get them to sponsor it, showcase how it could work, and it takes years sometimes. And nowadays people move around quite fast. So you could, again, see a huge incline and a huge drop again after that. This is a critical moment, because if you, again, think about the value I just mentioned, it's worth investing a lot, I would argue. So for the last minute, I'm just going to talk a little bit about where we're going to head with this. The future for this is around integration. It's basically for Shell KM in general, not just for this solution. And for us, again, it's not just improving the database, it's making sure that these lessons are being delivered right there at the moment of need, right there at the time. And that is a major aspect. And yeah, some things that influence this next strategy for LFE are quite familiar, I'm pretty sure, for you. We see now also the technology being ready. The major tech platforms have invested so much that the AI and the machine learning engines are finally becoming more mature, that we think in Shell this is useful for us in delivering tailored knowledge. So we're quite keen in making the next step in that way to deliver tailored knowledge right where they need it. And also another really big influence for us is that Shell now moving to a net zero emissions type of environment. It involves reskilling, upskilling, and new partnerships and new products as well. So again, being able to make sure people have what they need right at their fingertips, not waiting for them to come to our solutions, is a major part of our next strategy. And I put a picture there together where you see LV still there in the middle, the business process, sort of the different phases there. We do not expect, like I tried to say, a user to come to us to get what they need. The content needs to come to them in their business process, and that's that push part. So it's a pull and a push for KM for the next coming 5 years at least. And obviously that means if I'm the system and I want to push you some valuable content, I need to know who you are. I need to know what you're working on and what type of content you've already consumed. And those are very, very critical elements of that next stage, and that's what we're working on. Last but not least, and then I'll really stop. I think I have 1 minute left. It's still, even though the technology is there, and getting the critical knowledge right where it's needed, it's still KM very much working with the people in the business, and that's not going to end anymore. So it's an exciting future for Shell. I hope this was valuable for you, and I'm very open for your questions. Thank you so much. Yeah, excellent question. So maybe it's worth repeating the question for others. What is sort of the impact? I'm translating it in my own words. The impact of the major transition Shell is going through to the new energy, to become a new energy company, and what is the impact? That's a major shift for Shell, and especially for the people. So yes, we have tens of thousands of people in sort of the more conventional, let's say, oil and gas type of field. The majority of them will need to be reskilled, upskilled, and to become, let's say, a new type of energy, type of skilled worker for us. So it's massive. It's not something small. This will take a number of years, and we're already starting it. And again, this is where I try to show you the influences. This is one of the major influences for KM as well. How do we help those folks still use their knowledge, because somewhat is applicable in the new world, but also reskill them as well. It's a mammoth task, but yeah, it's very important. Yeah. I hope that helps. Is that, yeah. I'm sorry, sir, but I think you were first.
I was wondering, so when you go to interview people in order to capture that tacit knowledge, do you have like a general script that you use? Do you have particular people that are very, talented at sort of gathering information that people might not otherwise share?
Yes, this is about the methodology we use for the tacit knowledge capture, the interviewing. So like I tried to explain, we have these retirees in Shell, not that many, around 15 in Shell Global, that we train to how to ask the right questions. They prepare. That's a whole week of planning, by the way. That's not just a quick, let's have an informal coffee. They plan, they prepare, they invite a few other moderators there, key people there, and then they have a way of interviewing, asking the right questions, get to the point. That interview is at least 3 hours, could be longer. It's being recorded, like it is here, being transcribed. It goes back to the people all involved. They can moderate, adjust, etc. And then the lessons learned get subtracted from that, and that again gets approved. So yeah, there's a huge amount of steps and methodologies involved to make sure we really capture as much as possible. Again, it's still tacit knowledge, hence the video. You can still say, well, I need to know exactly how it was said, and then you can use the recording, review that. But the lessons learned we subtract are quite solid. I'm quite confident they're serving it their purpose. Yeah, is that helpful? Sorry, the gentleman there, please.
Thank you for your presentation. I had the opportunity to hear about Shell 20 years ago in Paris and what you were developing communities of practice back then. It's come a long way. The question I have is, in your development of technology, a lot of COP or communities of interest, lesson learned databases, all the technologies seem to be standalone places that you're trying to get people to come to be engaged. And that's the challenge in social media, or to get time, get people's time. Have you looked at integrating what you develop out of these tools back into the workflow applications that they're working with daily? The glossaries, the onboarding tools, and the training that's built into all of those new turnkey applications for their various areas. Have you looked at developing that as a form of communication?
We do, and we're not there yet at all. So I can't share you sort of the best way to do that. But it's absolutely important. People only come to your tools, whether it's KM or something else, if they get some value directly out of it. Same as in Shell. No one has time. No one. Everybody's way too busy. If your tool looks too clunky to use, or I don't get out of it immediately something, you know, that saves me a couple of minutes, I'm gone. I'm not coming back at all. So it's very critical to, of course, we're trying, of course, to integrate it, to make sure that content that people do make the time for to share is being used somewhere else, and that promotes the original tool, of course. So we're trying that. We're not there yet, absolutely not. Those experts I try to, I mentioned earlier, they play a critical role again to make sure the right content gets circulated and gets shared later again. And again, that drives a bit more behavior, but we're not there yet. Integration is the key, like I tried to share with you with the last couple of slides. We're really stepping away from that strategy. You know, we have the best tools, we have the best solution. Now, no one cares. No one cares. It needs to come to them where they are in their work process, in their email, for instance, if you want, in their MS Teams or whatever. No one has the time to, you know, like I said earlier, to see another database, right? Correct. I didn't bring it up, but it's this theme of learning in the flow of work. You probably have heard of this. This is we're quite a strong believer of that. You need to bring it in their flow of work. Yeah, yeah. Well, we're not there yet. No. Hopefully, next 2 years I'll be back and maybe I can report a bit more about it. Sorry.
Actually, we're out of time now, so we're going to give one more hand to Dan, and then you can talk about.
Thank you, and I'll be around.